Rav Hirsch on Hanukkah. Freilich Hanukkah, everybody. Hanukkah Sameach. So tonight we're going to look at Rav Hirsch from Horeb, section 245.
What page?
Page 152. And he speaks about Hanukkah and Purim, the two rabbinic holidays that are added to the Jewish calendar. We'll deal just with Hanukkah for now. When Israel saw itself gathered in part for a second time on ancestral soil, in order, as it were, to prepare itself for the great wandering through the millennia which lay before it, the wise leaders of the people saw it as their task to alert to the guidance which God, the Invisible One, would provide for Israel. One of the points Hirsch is going to make tonight is that Hanukkah, which we all understand was not intended to be a war for the bodies of Israel. It turned out to be that, right? But it didn't have to be. The Greeks could have won without significant bloodshed, right? Because really what they wanted to keep us in place. It's very interesting. We call it Golus Yavin, the exile of Greece, right? But it's the only exile we have where we didn't leave the land. We stayed in Israel.
We stayed there.
Exile usually implies our other exiles are the exile of Rome, which we're still in now, right? The exile of Babylon, where we were taken to Babylon. We were taken to Rome, right? But the exile of Yavin, right, we stayed in place. So why is it an exile, right? It's an exile because thrown over us was an alternate system, an alternate philosophy, an alternate way. And the Greeks, unlike the others, weren't out to wipe us out. The Romans wanted to wipe us out at the end. They were so frustrated by us that they thought that was the only solution. And we have seen throughout our history these two forms of oppression. You know, in Purim, we see it with Haman has no interest in convincing the Jews to become Persians, to become Iranians. He wants them dead in 127 provinces. He wants to accomplish what other great enemies of Jews have tried to do in the past. Right? The Greeks wanted to do their own form of eliminating the Jews, right? In a much more seductive way. You know? There's an idea that if Rabbi once raised the point that before Judaism, there were no religious wars of record. There were wars.
Yeah.
There were wars. No religious wars. Why? Because if you're a polytheist, right, you have 21 gods, right, and you conquer somebody, and you say, right, those are pretty good gods too, right? We'll make them junior gods, but now we've gone from 21 to 25 gods, right? Yeah. And this was the Alexandrian view. This was the Greek view, right? Your philosophy is very good. You know, even your God is not bad, right? And you have a lot of tremendous refinement in there, right? We'll include you in our pantheon, no problem. Right? But if you're a monotheist, right, going from one God to two is impossible.
You can't do that.
Absolutely impossible. We see, of our sister faiths, the faiths that came from Judaism, that one faith, Islam, right, is absolutely strictly monotheist. That they do not view themselves as anything but one God, right? That our Christian cousins, so to speak, have a lot of issues in which they seem to have taken in some qualities that are not monotheistic qualities into their system, but strive very hard to keep it as a unity, even though there seem to be divisions in this unity, depending on which brand of Christianity you're dealing with. The separations can verge on avodah zarah, clearly, and sometimes not. But the idea that you can add one God to two is impossible. That you can add 4 gods to 25 is very doable. So, in the story of Hanukkah, we like to think, especially in North America, and I come from the U.S., that freedom of religion is tremendously important, and that's what the Maccabees were fighting for. It was actually almost the opposite. The Hellenists believed in a universality of their faith. They were interested in the philosophy of the Jews. They were quite accommodating at the beginning. Right? The Maccabees, Matisyahu, right, was what unpleasant people would label today the ultra-Orthodox. They were the one who said, we don't believe in religious freedom. We believe in the faith of our fathers, in a living God, right? And we will not allow you to impede that, right? We will not allow you to have your religion coincide with ours. We will not allow you to have a gymnasium, and nakedness, as part of the belief in God. It doesn't work, right? And we will fight and die to prevent that from happening in Israel. Right? So it's an interesting question. Who was the one who really believed in freedom of religion? I think what we believed was in the truth of Judaism and in a mission that harkens back to Abraham. Anyway, let's see what Hirsch says. Because
I have a question, though. This is also, at the time, the Hellenists, well, the Greeks want their point of view, but a lot of Jews wanted to be Hellenists, right?
Absolutely.
This ended up being a war between Jews, too, right?
Absolutely. The Hanukkah story, the Hanukkah story is as much or more so, tragically. And again, we're going to see this is exactly what Rav Hirsch is speaking about, that this war has not ended. In the last, we saw the Shoah, which was Haman again, right? In Mein Kampf, he wrote, his name should be erased, Hitler wrote that even if one Jewish boy survived, he would have failed in his mission. And by the way, I understand that would have been true, because as long as there was a spark of godliness left in the world, right, then he would have failed in his mission, and indeed he did, thank God. We saw that, but then after the conquest of that, until quite recently, and I mean really in the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, the virulent, hateful, death wish anti-Semitism that we saw in the Shoah was dealt with. Many of us thought it was finished, right? But it doesn't go to bed so quickly.
Look in Hungary, just recently.
Absolutely. It's horrendous, right? And the call for Jewish blood is heard loud and clear today. And, the idea that the Holocaust never happened has become, a literary form. It's tragic. But during the time that the call for Jewish blood had subsided as a result of the defeat of the Nazis, right? And the brilliant rise from the ashes of Israel, there was still a tremendous desire to absorb Israel and the Jews into a greater culture. And this struggle never ends. Day to day, we raise our children, we live in this world. And interestingly enough, and I'm going to say something that's a tiny bit controversial, but Yavam Galus is about living in your own land, but having your eye on being something else, right? And, we still pray for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. We still pray for all the things that are part of Messianic Judaism in desire for the world to be a better place. In our Shemona Esrei that we prayed for 1,000 years. And you could say, what are we talking about the rebuilding of Jerusalem? Jerusalem's been rebuilt. It's a beautiful city. It's a modern city. It has everything. But the question is, where are people looking? Even in Israel, when we have it back. Are they looking towards their roots? Towards the source of the strength? To the source of their survival? Right? or are they looking to be, like America? To be like, whatever, this or that, right? It's very hard to be a light unto the nations if what you're trying to do is reflect the nations. You can't be the sun and the moon. The moon reflects, the sun shines, right? To be a light unto the nations, right? You have to be a light itself, right? And this is a battle that never ends for us until we have a real sense of the gift that we are. Let's see what Hirsch says. Okay. They noted every misfortune as well as deliverance from it. And then they raised the day of deliverance to a day of remembrance, so that later generations might learn from the internal and external battles of their ancestors, which won existence for them in Galus, so that they might learn from that Israel's blessed gift, the Torah, must be preserved in order that fathers could hand it down unadulterated to their descendants, and how God, though not with open miracles as in Egypt, had watched unseen over both Israel and the Torah, protecting and maintaining and saving them. Thus did Megillas Esther come into being, a record of the danger in which Israel's life and Israel's Torah rolled hither and thither, mainly under the impression of Syrian Macedonian rule. He's combining two ideas there. Dangers in which the Torah swayed through internal divisions, strange to the true spirit of Israel. But when in the course of time Israel was bereft of all external independence, its whole existence and the continuous upkeep of the Torah became an unending miraculous revelation of the unseen omnipotent God. Suffering such as those recorded in Megillas Esther became part of Israel's everyday will to live. And therefore, as our sages express it, the flesh which through suffering had grown insensible to the usual feelings could no longer feel the wounding knife. Such a daily recording of suffering and deliverance was then discontinued, and the further observance of the days already recorded became extinct among the total destruction. Only two, the most important, were kept as an abiding beacons for the scattered ones of Israel, so that they might proclaim to them that although He be invisible, He is no less omnipresent, all protecting, all saving, and that God, the God of their fathers, tarries with them even in exile. Every testing comes from His hand. Every tear is shed before His eye. Every sigh wends its way to Him. And when ruthless violence tries to kill the spirit of Israel, or crafty conspirators plan to sport with the fate of helpless ones, the God of Israel still watches over their spirit and destiny. And the plotters, they slide to their self-destruction.
Like Haman.
Like Haman. These two commemorations of the Godhead protecting Israel in Galus are Hanukkah and Purim. Hanukkah begins on the 25th of Kislev and lasts 8 days. Purim is on the 14th and the 15th of Adar. Hanukkah, the event. And you'll see he deals with both the Greeks and the Hellenists here. Right? But he clearly believes, and he writes in other places, that Hellenism was had tremendous appeal to the Jewish people. Right? It was a very refined and sophisticated thing that would touch on us. We know that at that time that Greek was the only other language that you could write a Torah, kosher Torah.
Yeah, that's considered to be valid, right? Yeah. If you had a Torah,
not today.
Not today.
Not today. A Greek Torah today, you wouldn't be able to use.
You wouldn't be able to use.
It's a question whether it's the same Greek.
Oh, I've heard they had a Greek Torah.
But Greek is the outside of the coin, so to speak.
Okay. So no one actually would write. They actually did write a Greek Torah. It wouldn't be. You couldn't use it.
You wouldn't use it today.
Okay.
You wouldn't use it today. The event. The empire conquered by Alexander of Macedon became the prey to his generals after his sudden death. Alexander died very young. Was it
33?
33, yeah. 33.
He was educated by Aristotle.
That's right.
And it was about 325 BC.
Yeah.
Because I teach a course on this.
Oh. Yeah. And there was a sudden death. He didn't linger. It happened very quickly.
Very quickly.
Why did he die?
He was in Persia conquering away, got all the way over to India, and he was exhausted, just exhausted. Right. And he caught a sudden illness and passed away at about 32, 33.
Right.
Wow.
Beware of foreign food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Zenda, they call them.
Right.
Countries.
And so he died suddenly. Countries and people sighed under the scourge of war, which those in power kindled in their fractiousness. This is after his death, the quarrels among their generals. Israel's, whose seeming restoration by Cyrus was never really won, and who, though internally independent, yet externally remained only a favored province under Persian rule. Israel was sorely wounded by the frequent battles, and ultimately became a province of the Seleucids of Syria. They were originally, but a couple of things is on our calendar, Hanukkah comes first, right? It comes right now at Kislev, right? Adar, which is 2 months later, is when Purim comes. But of course, historically, Purim came first, right? The Golos to Babylon came first. They returned from Babylon, rebuilt the temple, and then this whole process began. Alexander, we know, in his conquests, came to the doors of literally to the doors of Jerusalem, and made a decision. It's a very famous story about why he didn't conquer Jerusalem. There was an unheard of thing happened. Was that the high priest, and now I'm struggling to remember which high priest it was, came out of the temple dressed in the big day kahuna, dressed in the clothing of the high priest, which is generally forbidden. You're only allowed to wear the priestly garments during the service of the priesthood, so you would wear it in the temple. He left the temple, came with a retinue to Alexander's forces. Alexander looked at the Kohen Gadol, right? Dismounted from his horse, right, and came to him and bowed to him.
That's Aristotle.
What?
He's reflecting his teacher.
Yeah. Could be. But when asked later, he came back to his generals and he turned his generals about face. Right? We're not conquering Jerusalem. Right? And there was twofold element in it, that the Jews made a deal with Alexander, right? And they were going to pay a tribute to him, right? They paid a very minor tribute to him in terms of dollars, right? The major tribute that they paid to him was, my father had an older brother. He was Uncle Al, Alexander. Alexander is a Jewish name. The promise made was that some say firstborn males in the families of Jews would be named after Alexander. So Alexander has become a very, you meet many people whose name is, you meet Russian Jews, their name is Sasha. It's Alexander, right? It's a very common Jewish name, and it comes from Alexander the Great.
Wow.
That's who it comes from, right? It comes from this deal. But that wasn't the reason that he turned back, right? He said to his generals who were beside him, some much older than him, he said, I have to explain to you that before every great battle, I have a dream. And in the dream, I am promised victory over the enemy. And it is this man who always comes to me in the dream.
Yeah.
Wow.
The Kohen Gadol, he sees him.
He sees the Kohen Gadol dressed in the big day kahuna.
In the big day kahuna.
In the uniform.
So he
of the
saw it and really must have freaked out.
He said, right? And there he was, live in person.
Yeah.
So, there's an expression, not to cook the goose that lays the golden egg.
Yeah.
Right? Here's the guy who's promising me success, and it works every time. Every time I go to battle, I win.
Yeah.
Right? Every time before it, I see this guy, right? And he tells me, and he looks. This is him, right? And so Alexander said, "We're not going to conquer this city.
Wow.
Leave it be." Right? And he continued on in his conquest. Right? But after the division of Israel, of Alexander's territories, Israel did not fall to the Seleucids originally. fell first to the Ptolemies, right? Because it was part of the empire is ruled by what were really Macedonian pharaohs called the Ptolemies, right? And they were better. They were much better as rulers. In fact, our relationship with Egypt always seems to be much better than with our other neighbors, historically. It's an interesting fact. Even though we had, the slavery in Egypt is central to our historical story, there is not a tremendous negative feeling left over in the Torah towards Egypt. It's interesting. Shouldn't live there. Shouldn't live there. But, in many ways, it's recognized as a place that we turn to for assistance, as opposed to Babylon, where we don't. And so the Ptolemies lost part of their empire to the Seleucids. Hi, how are you? The Ptolemies lost part of their empire to the Seleucids, who were really the Syrian Greeks, and that part of that portion was involved what is today Israel. And that's when things started to turn very, very unpleasant. Right. So countries and people sighed under the scourge of war, because here we are back. Cyrus had never really given back and the country had never become independent, yet externally remained only a favored province under Persian rule. Israel was sorely wounded by the frequent battles and ultimately became a province of the Seleucids of Syria. So it went from Persia to the Ptolemies and finally to the Seleucids of Syria. Under Antiochus Epiphanes, who is also called Antiochus the Madman, a prince of Syria, Israel were now to see for the first time the weapons of force directed not against their possessions, nor against their life, nor against their freedom, but against that which was more to them than possessions and property, than land and life and freedom. Namely, the tenets and practices of their faith, the raison d'etre of their life. Now you have to remember, Hirsch is writing at a time before the state of Israel existed, the new state of Israel, right? So he's writing at a time where the faith of Yiddishkeit, right, regardless of the land of Israel, is what is holding it all together, right? Today we know how critical Israel is to us, right? But during Hirsch's life, in 1800 years earlier, right, there was no state of Israel, right? And that's what he's writing from as he writes. You have to keep that in mind.
He's also in a period of the Enlightenment, what they call, right?
He's in a period. Absolutely right, Charles. He's in a period of real Hellenism.
Hellenism, yeah.
The reform movement. Where not only do we not have the land, right? Yeah. Remember, at the time of the Hellenists, the Jews were still connected to the land. It was an agricultural society. The festivals were connected to the seasons, right? The temple was a central place that people came to 3 times a year. All those things. In Hirsch's time, there was none of it, right? And the power of the development of the Enlightenment was so powerful that this was, you're right, he was right in the middle of this.
Right in the middle of that.
And that should also always be kept in mind.
Probably in his
object, the object of Antiochus, was the extinction of their conscience, the death of their purity of living, the extirpation of Israel's way of life. Egypt enslaved Israel's body. Babylon and later Rome were conquerors of the countries. Persia was even kind to vanquished provinces. All represented overwhelming might and pursued greater power and wider conquest. To Antiochus the Madman, as he was called in later times, he was left the honor of beginning to direct despotic power against the spirit, to render Israel familiar with the trials of the sort which awaited them throughout so many centuries, with the choice between death of the spirit and death of the body. Adherence to the mainstays of Israel's life, Torah, Sabbath, circumcision, was paid for with death. Death was a penalty for the fulfillment of every religious obligation. The chastity of the home was brutally ravaged by the lust of the satraps. The temple was desecrated. Idols were set up therein. The renunciation of one God and sacrificing to idols were to be enforced by the terror of death. Then fell the first corpses for the survival of Torah.
Wow.
So what he's doing is he's separating the idea of survival of man from survival of Torah. Right? That, Napoleon, when Napoleon was conquering Europe and went into Russia, there was a big question among the Hasidim of the Baltanya as to which side they should be on. That Napoleon promised much more freedom to the Jews than the Tsar. The Tsar, there was the Pale of Settlement, there was tremendous oppression, there were pogroms, it was very bad. Right?
The French Revolution, the ideals.
Yeah, and the French Revolution had the ideal that if you're a French Jew, you should have the rights of every other Frenchman. But if you're a Jewish Frenchman, you have no rights at all. It was a very important thing, right? He said, as long as you buy into being French first, then you're entitled to all the privileges of that which is French. Right? The Balatanya, understanding this, said, we're going to work for the Czar.
Yeah, he went with the other way.
He went with the Czar.
Because he thought
he spied for the Czar, actually. Yeah. Right? Because he thought the Jews will not survive what is really the Hellenizing influence of Napoleon. Now, in deference to my grandmother, I will tell you, whenever she would hear stories like this, she was anxious she was Viennese, and she was anxious to remind people who would tell such stories that the shtetl, the gates of the shtetl, were always locked from the outside. Right? We weren't locking them out. They were locking us in, is what it was. Now, we may have benefited from enforced isolation, but we shouldn't have to make the kind of decision that the Balatanya made. Yiddishkeit should be so powerful, so attractive, so desirable that whatever is thrown in front of us is not more appealing. Not more appealing. But we live in a world of tests, one kind or another.
Then when the faithful had fallen.
Right. So his point here is that this was the first experience in which people were told, live your life as a Greek and you're going to have a wonderful life. There's no need to leave the country, to leave your homes. Everything's going to be fine. Right? Reject us and you put your life on the line. Right? But there's no need to put your life on the line. Unlike the Nazis, Machimo, right? They had no desire just to kill us for the sake of killing us. They just want us to be like them. And then everything would be fine. Right? Then when the faithful had fallen, when the weak were beginning to falter, when all that spelt Israel seemed lost, then rose Matthias, the son of Yochanan the priest, and his sons. He did not count the number of those who were like-minded. He had faith in the Spirit of the living God, who endowed the Spirit with victory over ruthless violence. He rose up to fight against this devastating frenzy and caused the weakness of the faithful to be victorious, completely victorious over the violence of the presumptuously arrogant. And just as God watched over the security of the Spirit of Israel amid the violence and rage and caused the light of Israel to be rekindled by the flaming Spirit, which still shone pure in the breast of one man, so did he declare by a visible symbol that in a time of desolation, he watches over the Spirit of Israel. As soon as the tyrants were banished, the land cleansed, and the temple purged of the idolatrous abominations, the temple lamp, the telling symbol of the God-created spiritual light of Israel, was rekindled. But only one cruse of oil, enough to last one day, was found, and still undefiled. But lo, he who watches over Israel's spiritual light causes it to last for 8 days, 8 whole days, until fresh oil was prepared. This sign of our ancestors grasped fully, and they raised it to a meaningful celebration of days of remembrance, which they instituted in commemoration of this event. Now, this is a very important point, I think, because, and I think many of us struggle with this, is that the military victory was so remarkable. You know, I mean, in our own time, you might compare it to the 6-Day War.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. There's so many against so few.
It was such an
overwhelming.
That it was such a clear and obvious miracle. That, and the miracle of the oil is kind of troubling because, in fact, right through the time of Shimon and Tzaddik, the westernmost globe of the menorah would always burn for 24 hours. It never went out. Right? It was like a minor miracle, but it went on every day.
You mean the fact that it never seemed to run out of oil, right?
Never ran out of oil. The others had to be replenished, every morning, but it was always burning, right? It wasn't a bigger globe. It wasn't anything else. That's how it was, right? So the question, how could that be, right? And why is the oil so significant at this point? So that's one question. The other issue, which is we have many other stories in our history of the miracle of oil. The story of
there's one with vinegar.
Mendoza, right?
Yeah, with the vinegar.
Mendoza, right? It's a fairly famous tale. I think probably anybody who's been watching Kosher Tube has heard it 3 or 4 times this hanuka. But he was a very poor man, a great tzaddik. He was one of the people that God said that the world rested on, my beloved Chanina Mendoza, right? And his wife came to him and said, "What are we going to do? It's Shabbos, and we have no oil for a lichtbenchen, for lighting for Shabbos, for near Shabbos." And they said, "Well, you should put vinegar in the Shabbos lights." She looked at her dear husband like this crazy person and said, "Vinegar?" He said, "Yeah, vinegar. He who causes oil to burn certainly can cause vinegar to burn." And of course, they had a beautiful Shabbos, and the vinegar burned beautifully, right? Now, this was for Chanina Mendoza.
Yeah.
Right? But miracles of oil are not that unique to us. The miracle of, to this day, if you go visit the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, right, there's a bust of Yehuda Maccabee, statue of Yehuda Maccabee in a place of great honor there. Right? Why? Because Yehuda Maccabee is viewed as the founder of guerrilla warfare, not Che Guevara, right? Not Ho Chi Minh, right?
How do we know what he looked like?
Yehuda Maccabee.
Do they just suppose they think they have an idea?
There were no photographs.
Yeah.
Right. And Greek statues, I don't think you can rely on it. Really.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Just what it looked like.
But there's a statue of him there,
wow. And
there's a little story that's worth telling is that they used to teach at West Point the Hanukkah Wars as part of it was really the Book of Maccabees, which is not part of Tanakh, but is a book written at that time, which was really the history of the war itself, the tactics, the process that went on. And the colonel who was teaching it was a devout Christian. And at one point he decided, he went to the senior staff and he said, "This is a mistake." And he didn't want to teach it anymore. And the reason he gave was he said, we're teaching these tactics as though this is something that our soldiers should employ. But really it's suicide. They were fighting a miraculous war in which God was by their side moment to moment. I think there's never more than 2,000 soldiers against literally 100,000 soldiers.
Yeah, I was wondering, how many guys did he have?
There's very few.
Didn't have that many guys.
And so the colonel, I read an article from this colonel about it, and he said he thinks it's suicide to teach American forces that this is tactics that they should use because they'll be killed. And So they stopped teaching the course, right? For that reason, and they kind of teach it as a historical course, but not as a tactical course. But there is a question why this seems to be so miraculous, and yet we focus on the oil. Some people would argue we focus on the oil because we haven't been a military power for so long. That so in our gullus, in our exile, not to emphasize military power, but to emphasize spiritual power, which is associated with this. But I think Rav Hirsch is telling us something here, and he's going to get to it.
Every year.
Each year, what he's telling us was that this Hanukkah experience was a preparation for exiles yet to come. Really. Each year, when the Hanukkah season reoccurs, lights are kindled in every home of Israel, and by every son of Israel, and the events of those days are celebrated in word and in song, paying homage to God. Thus the darkened courses of Israel are lit up by this message, quote, "The spiritual light of Israel will never be dimmed, and even if round about you everything becomes defiled by the oppression of time, so long as the light remains pure within the confines of only one house, or within the breast of only one man, live on joyfully amid all the wanton aberration. Even die joyfully under the frenzy of a madman. For the spiritual life of Israel is saved. God watches over it. Even by the light of one man, he rekindles it anew." Now, one might have thought that one of the most evil men in history read these lines. Because this was exactly the point that he made. If one Jew should survive, my whole philosophy is defeated. Hirsch is actually saying that. Even by the light of one man, he rekindles it anew. "Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts," from Zechariah. So then he goes into the celebration. Thus, Hanukkah commemorates the preservation of the spirit of Israel in Gullus. The 8-day celebration begins on the 25th of Kislev, which traditionally, by the way, would fall. We have a lunar calendar that's a lunar solar calendar adjusted, but the Maharal understands the 25th of Kislev to actually be the solar equinox, the darkest day of the year. Right now, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, because the solar that point in the solar calendar, we know is the solar date of December 21st, 22nd is when it falls. But traditionally, the 25th of Kislev was in that area. Right? During this time, any form of public mourning or fasting is forbidden. So we don't eulogize the dead during Hanukkah. To engage in one's occupation is not forbidden, unlike Chol Moed, for instance, of other holidays. Nevertheless, so long as the festival lights are burning, one should devote one's thoughts exclusively to the significance of these lights, and one should therefore refrain from any other occupation during the time. So that's for a half hour after the candles have been lit. You really should, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said you should listen to the story of the candles. Just peacefully listen to it. As the underlying motive of the festival is the spirit, it is celebrated only spiritually. There are no ordinances for material festive pleasures. For instance, unlike Purim, where the Purim Suda is central to the holiday, we have no requirements for a Hanukkah meal. So we eat, some days I feel like if you put a wick in my mouth, I would burn for 8 days after eating, oily latkes and donuts. But the truth is that, we only eat the latkes and donuts to remember oil. That's it.
I was just wondering why
eat French fries too.
It's
oil. That's why we do it. It's to remember oil. That's why we eat things that are cooked.
Why a latke?
Cooked in oil. Things that are cooked in oil. That's why. That's the only reason to do it. There are actually two traditions of Hanukkah, to be fair, right? One is oil, the other is dairy.
That's
right. Because of Yael's killing of the general, that she fed him salty cheese, then he wanted wine, and then he fell asleep, and then she cut his head off.
Yeah.
And that had a very big impact on the world. So dairy products play a role in Hanukkah.
Would French fries be allowed because you make them in oil?
The tradition, for some reason, the tradition seems to be jelly donuts, which I don't understand
Where
at
that
all.
came from.
But my grandmother made donuts that were deep fried in oil, like just regular donuts. They were very nice, right, with powdered sugar. I remember them well. And the latkes were the tradition among Ashkenazi Jews. Sephardim, I think, had donuts, sufganiyot, but I don't think that they were always stuffed with raspberry jam. I'm not sure of that. I think that's something that's...
It's funny.
I don't know the history of it. Let me just say that. I am not bokeh on that.
So this idea of oil and light, it's the light of Hashem, that's deep spirituality, as opposed to Platonic forms, which are ideas of knowledge.
Absolutely.
I'm going back to their time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. That their the Gemara says that if you were to say that there is no knowledge or understanding in the nations, you would be wrong. You would be fool. Right? But if you were to say that there was Torah in the nations, you would be a liar.
That's right.
You'd be false. Right? So, and this is the difference between the two lights. Right? There is a brilliant light of art, of academia, and things like that, right? But the light that we're talking about here, the light of Hanukkah, right, which is a pure but not a noisy light. And the Hanukkah light can be as high as this high from the ground, right? It doesn't, it shouldn't be towering. That we have these big displays. They're not kosher menorahs. They're just symbols, right? And they have their value, right? But the menorah itself is intended to be it's a pure light, and it is a light. Oil is associated with Torah, and it's a light of Hashem, and it's a light. It's a knowledge that is above logic, right? The Greeks had a great knowledge that was based on logic,
And form.
right? And form. Right? That's right. Form and function.
Go into a cave and see a pale reflection.
Yeah. But this was a different light, and we know that this talk of, I told you the story of Rav David of Tolna. It's a famous story, but that said that the light of the candle that Rav David of Tolna would light on the first night of Hanukkah was reminiscent of the light of creation. Right? Now, this light was not a light like when you turn the light on in the room. It was a light that gave Adam the capability to see from one end of the universe to the other, right? And also to see within objects, right? So that, if today we would call it X-ray vision, Superman had it, right? Mm-hmm. But this was a unique kind of light, and this light was hidden away.
Question. The Rambam talks about first a separation in one book, separating out. And when you spoke about creation, that's what Hashem did, separated things.
Yes.
The other thing he talks about is spirituality, in which things are seen in Hashem in a deeper way. And what I'm trying to say is that our light, compared to the Platonic or Aristotelian lights, goes far more intensive and in-depth in things and across time and space into an infinite world.
I think actually that's the key to it, what you said at the very end, was that logic and the light of logic, logos, right, Greek word, is finite.
It's finite.
And our difficulties in trying to explain our belief sometimes is trying to cross a bridge that cannot be crossed, which is from the finite to the infinite. Right? They are two different places.
But our rabbinic tradition crosses it and gets at it. in a way that I've never seen in any other body of knowledge.
I would debate that it crosses it.
You don't think it crosses it?
Even Kabbalists, even the Ari Kodesh himself, does not want to go past understanding how the Shefa comes to us, as opposed to the essence of the Shefa. Right? Crossing that point, getting beyond the dot of the Yud, is a place that a crown that they don't go to.
Where right. I'm talking about is the doing of the commandments, the halakhas, allows us to bridge that.
It allows us
in a way.
I would agree with you in the sense that it allows us to connect to the will of the infinite. Right? Whereas I think that the Greek process was not an attempt to do that. They would have had some question whether there was an infinite, in the same sense. So I think that it is two things can look very similar, but
they're very different.
In depth, they are completely separate. Right? And I think that was true. I think that when Rambam is often accused of being Aristotelian, and he was a fan of Aristotle's, right?
Very much so.
But you can see the places where he separates from Aristotle are very, very basic. They're the core of understanding, and I think that. But also, the golden mean, right? For the golden mean, right? The Greek golden mean was to take pride in your work. It was to take pride. You should be proud of your success, right? It was an indication that you were in the mean. You shouldn't be crazy about it. You should be depressed about it. You should have pride in the beauty and success. For Rambam, the golden mean is humility. You should be humbled by what you're doing. Right. It's very interesting. They're both talking about the golden mean, but they have completely different meanings.
Completely different.
And
the Rambam used sources that were Jewish sources within the Shema Baruchim about humility, but the Rambam was opposing it to. He was saying, take theoretical reason, which he defined as halacha, and think about it successively until you can think about the halacha, particular halachas in your life, which he called practical reason, theoretical and practical reason. But it's based on halacha.
I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm going to continue because otherwise we won't finish. But the Rambam is
deep.
Rambam is a whole other conversation, right? And only came up for me because we're dealing with Hellenism. That's all. And he was accused and suffered, and his work suffered for significantly for his connection to Aristotle, which he didn't hide.
Everyone must observe.
I don't know what I do with that. You're helping with this, Charles. Okay, so we're
near the Oaths, chapter 670. Everyone must observe.
Everyone must observe the duty of kindling the lights, for they shine forth that which is exalted and eternal. On the first evening, one light is kindled in every house. On the second, 2 lights. One more is lit each day. Where possible, this should be done by every individual in the house, but in such a way the total number of lights requisite for any particular evening remains recognizable. One must take special care that the continually growing number of lights should be discernible. The whole purpose of the mitzvah, Rambam holds that each person should light a candle for each night, right? And so that if you, on the second night of Hanukkah, if you had 8 people in your home, you would have 16 candles spread out,
too.
Right? No. You would have 16 candles. There were no menorahs. There's 16 candles, right? Which the Ramah said, this is like, no. It's really not doing the job. Because it's not the 16th night of Hanukkah.
I see.
So, and Spartan, by the way, light one menorah. They light one menorah for the family, right, and increase it each night. Ashkenazim different people hold different ways, but most hold that certainly all the males in the house light, and some of the younger girls do. Wives don't, because their husbands light on their behalf, just like we don't light Shabbos candles since our wives light for us. It's a whole question when you travel and all that. We won't get into the law because we talked about that before. But if you're doing that, it's very important not to light them all in the same window or have them at the same height, right? Because if you had, 4 menorahs in the window and they were all the same height, on the 5th day you would have some 20 candles going, and would they be discernible as 4 sets or 5 sets, right? So, for instance, in our home we light one candle, one menorah. It's only 2 of us lighting. One menorah in the front window, and my son lights in the backyard in a box, right? So that we're shining the miracle in both directions in the house, right? You can light at different places in the house too. But it's very important not to confuse a passerby into thinking, well, this is the 4th night of Hanukkah, when really it's the 2nd night of Hanukkah, but you've got 2 menorahs side by side. Right? So that's Rav Hirsch, because he's so close to our time of being, is actually dealing with the halacha as it is today. The requirement is to light 1 candle each night of Hanukkah, not to light 1 more each night. That's a mehadrin thing to do, and to light, for everybody to light, is mehadrin min mehadrin. Right? It's an interesting thing. People who don't shake an esrog, right, and people who often don't get to shul, right, keep this holiday mehadrin min mehadrin. More than any other holiday, and Baruch Hashem that they do.
Before Israel
lived among peoples of other faiths, the lights were kindled in the front part of the house at the entrance, to the left of the person entering and facing the mezuzah. For us, it remains a domestic festival within the house. I would argue with Rav Hirsch on this. They, the lights, stand with the holy purport and must not be used for any other purpose. For that reason, another light burns near in order to shed light. It's proper actually to have. You can't read a book by it. You can't even eat a meal by it. If somebody serves you your latkes and you need the light of the menorah to see the latkes, you should have another light on, other candles. Some people say the shamash is the other light, and and you can read by the shamash. But the shamash is so close to the menorah that
it wouldn't count.
There's a real question there. So, when in doubt, turn on the kitchen light.
That's it.
At that point. And I think that it's not just. I think one of the things that separates Hanukkah from Shabbos, right? Shabbos is we light candles in the evening before sunset of Shabbos. And we light them behind our closed doors with our shades down, and it's the warmth of the Shabbos light and family. It lights the table. We're having our meal. There's a special intimacy to it. Hanukkah is almost the opposite. It's intended to be a light that shines out, right? It's proclaiming a miracle, right? And it's making a statement, right? That we will remain true, right? Not by violence and not by seduction will we change. Our light will shine out to you. We're not asking your light to shine into our home. Our light will shine out to you, right? In order to accomplish that, our ancestors lit outside. They stopped doing it because it was getting stolen, right? Is why I did it, and it would sometimes cause violence to happen in their homes in certain countries, right? So there was a concern about that you can't do it. It'll endanger people, right? Or you'll lose the value of your menorah. So the tradition was to begin to light inside all the time. But I think it's very much intended to be, and in the world we live in, where sadly most Jews are not observant, that the menorah does serve a purpose, and you hear about it every year. Every year there's some Jew who sees a menorah in somebody's window and it changes their life. Not, it wasn't talking about a revolution of hundreds of thousands of Jews. But every year you'll see that, some Jew, they saw this, or somebody gave them a $2 menorah or whatever, and things came flooding back from their childhood or whatever. There's something, the idea of a pintel yid is a little flame in the Jew, right? That can be fanned into a burning flame. Every year it happens, right? And it would not happen if the menorah was not put in the window. It would not happen if the menorah was not outside, and I always remember many, many years ago I heard a shiur, and maybe we'll end with this, is that we've talked about this before, that the idea that there are 3 sets of lights in Judaism. There is the holiest of holy lights, the menorah that's lit in the temple in Jerusalem, and it's lit during the day. Right? There's no need for light, and its purpose is to shine light out into the world. And it's up on a pedestal, and it's lit very much in seclusion, not in a public place. And it's lit by among the holiest men in the world. Sometimes a Kohen Gadol, sometimes a Kohen Hedyot, a regular Kohen, but always by a Kohen. Right? This is one. Right? We don't have it anymore. Maybe it's in Shemayim. It's not in Jerusalem. It's not going on now. Right? There's a menorah there, by the way, but there's no temple.
Yeah,
right.
Big one.
Then we have the Shabbos lights. Right? We don't light the Shabbos lights in the morning. We light them between day and night. Right? Just as evening is coming in, we light them. Right? Just at the end of day, we light them. We light them. Oh, and by the way, the menorah, you stand on a pedestal to light. You have to walk up 3 steps to light. Right? This is tabletop height. Right? It's for our families. There's a warmth to it. There's a connection to it. It's just Shabbos light. There's a very special intimacy to it. Right? We all are familiar with it, but many Jews are not. There are many, many Jewish homes where there's no Shabbos light. Nobody lights Shabbos candles. It's hard to believe, right? But it's true. Just to go back to the menorah in the temple for 1 second, right? Who lit that menorah at the beginning? It was Aaron himself, the brother of Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron HaKohen Gadol, right? And his feelings were hurt. We read about it in the Chumash. Because as each of the princes brought their gifts to the temple, Aaron didn't. God didn't tell him to bring anything. And he complained. He was the head of the house of Levi, of the family of Levi. Levi's not going to bring anything to the temple. God said, your portion is greater.
Peace.
Your portion is greater, right? Your halach is greater, right? Right. What will it be? You will light the menorah. And when all the gifts that were brought from the other tribes are gone, and one temple is destroyed, another temple is destroyed, Jews throughout the world continue to light the candles of Aaron HaKohen. Right? And now we come to the third one. We talked about the first one, lit at day on a pedestal. Second one in the evening at the table level, right? And then there's the little menorah, right? Not lit by the matriarch of the home, right? But lit by the youngest child, right? Or the oldest man, right? Can be 3 feet, less than a foot and a half off the ground, 3 tefachim off the ground, right? Tiny little thing, right? Can't be too high. The actual limitation to how high it can be. Right? What is it, right? It's a renewed promise. It's Aaron himself, right? Who was Aaron HaKohen, right? Aaron HaKohen was more loved by the people than Moshe Rabbeinu. They mourned more deeply for him when he died, right? It's his light calling out to the Yid out there, to the Jew out there who is estranged, who is separated from to say the flame still burns. The light still burns, right? The simplest of lights. And when is it lit? Not in the morning, like in the temple, and not in the evening, like Shabbos. In the middle of the darkest nights of the year, this flame is lit. And this is the portion of Aaron. Someday, God willing, tomorrow or the next day, we'll see this candle lit in the
Beis Hamikdash.
Beis Hamikdash. You know,
Amen.
with the coming of Mashiach, B'mehera B'yameinu. Amen.
Amen.